She was 34 years old. He was 12. She was his teacher. And by the time the legal system caught up with what had been happening inside that relationship, she was already pregnant with his child. That is where this story begins. Not with a suspicion. Not with a rumor. With a pregnancy. With charges. With a courtroom. And with a plea agreement that the judge would later call one of the most consequential decisions of her career. Mary Kay Letourneau was a second-grade teacher in Burien, Washington. She had 4 children of her own. She was married. She held a professional license. She was trusted by parents, respected by colleagues, and considered by her school community to be exactly the kind of educator you want teaching your child. And she used every single element of that trust to build a relationship with a student that resulted in 2 criminal convictions, 2 pregnancies, and a life outcome for that student that researchers and clinicians have since examined as a case study in the long-term consequences of childhood sexual abuse. This is the crime scene. Stay with me all the way through. This case goes further than most people realize. Mary Catherine Schmitz was born on January 13, 1962, in Tustin, California. Her father was John G. Schmitz, a Republican congressman, a member of the John Birch Society, and a man who ran for president on the American Independent Party ticket in 1972. He was a figure of considerable political prominence in California, and the household that Mary Kay grew up in reflected that prominence in every visible way. The family was deeply Catholic. There were 9 children in the Schmitz home. The environment was structured, disciplined, religiously observant, and anchored to a very specific image of what a respectable family looked like from the outside. That image was carefully maintained. What is important to understand about that environment, and this becomes relevant later, is that it was a household defined by the gap between public presentation and private reality. John Schmitz himself became the subject of significant personal scandal years later, a revelation that permanently altered the family's public narrative. The details of that are a separate story. What matters here is the framework in which Mary Kay Letourneau was raised: performance, expectation, and the careful management of outward appearances regardless of what was happening beneath the surface. People who knew Mary Kay during her childhood and early adult years described her as bright, sociable, and eager to connect with people around her. She attended Arizona State University. It was there that she met Steve Letourneau. They married in 1984. She adopted the Mormon faith around the time of the marriage. The couple eventually settled in the state of Washington, and Mary Kay moved forward with what appeared, from every external angle, to be a conventional professional and personal life. She completed her education degree. She was hired as a second-grade teacher at Shorewood Elementary School in the Highline School District in Burien, Washington. She had 4 children with Steve. And within the school community, she was genuinely regarded as a capable, attentive, and dedicated teacher. Parents liked her. Administrators respected her. Children in her class responded to her warmth. That professional image is important to hold clearly in your mind as this documentary moves forward. Because the distance between that image and what was actually occurring is precisely what makes this case significant. Her marriage to Steve Letourneau was, by accounts from people close to the couple during that period, under sustained strain. Financial pressures were persistent. The relationship had difficulties that were not visible to the outside world but that were known within the couple's closer social circle. The domestic picture that the family presented publicly did not fully match the private reality. And it was within that context, professional competence on the surface, personal instability underneath, that Mary Kay Letourneau first encountered a child named Vili Fualaau. Vili Fualaau was born on June 26, 1983, in Washington State. He was of Samoan descent. His mother, Suna Fualaau, was a single parent raising Vili and his siblings primarily on her own. The family's financial circumstances were modest. Life presented real challenges. Vili entered Mary Kay Letourneau's second-grade classroom when he was approximately 6 years old. By multiple accounts from that period, he was an engaged, creative child with a particular ability in visual art. His teacher recognized that ability and gave it deliberate attention and encouragement. That initial dynamic, teacher identifying a student's talent, nurturing it, building a relationship of trust and attention around it, is, in isolation, an entirely normal and appropriate part of good teaching. It is also, the research literature on grooming makes clear, a pattern that can be systematically used to establish the foundation for something far outside the boundaries of an appropriate teacher-student relationship. Vili moved through subsequent grade levels at Shorewood Elementary. He remained at the same school. His contact with Mary Kay Letourneau continued. And at some point during the years that followed his second grade year, the nature of that relationship moved outside every professional, legal, and ethical boundary that exists between an educator and a child in that educator's care. By the time Vili was 12 years old and in 6th grade, Mary Kay Letourneau was 34. She was a credentialed teacher with professional obligations toward the children in her school. She was a married woman with 4 children of her own. And according to the evidence that law enforcement investigators assembled and that was subsequently entered into legal proceedings, a sexual relationship between Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau had been established. This is the point in the documentary where precision and clarity matter most. A 12-year-old child cannot consent to a sexual relationship with an adult. That is not a statement that requires qualification. It is the settled position of law, clinical psychology, developmental science, and child welfare practice across every jurisdiction in the United States and in the vast majority of legal systems worldwide. The legal framework does not recognize the possibility of consent below the age of 14 in Washington state, and the clinical framework does not recognize the possibility of equal or healthy sexual engagement between an adult in a position of authority and a child subject to that authority, at any age. The narrative that this relationship was a mutual love story between two people who happened to be separated by an age gap and a legal barrier is a narrative that received significant media attention in the years that followed. This documentary will examine that narrative and what the evidence and research say about it. What is established now, as a factual and legal baseline, is that the conduct in question was criminal, was harmful, and was carried out by an adult against a child. By the mid-1990s, the relationship between Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau had been ongoing for a period of time that investigators would later work to establish with precision. The relationship was not sustainable indefinitely. Evidence of it eventually became visible. The first formal disclosure came in the summer of 1996. Mary Kay Letourneau was pregnant. She was 34 years old, still married to Steve Letourneau, and the child she was carrying was not her husband's child. Steve Letourneau became aware of the situation. Information was relayed to authorities through a process that has been reported in various ways across different accounts, but the outcome was consistent across all of them. Law enforcement received information, an investigation was initiated, and both Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau were interviewed by investigators. The investigation confirmed the facts that had been reported. Mary Kay Letourneau was taken into custody on February 26, 1997. She was formally charged with 2 counts of second-degree rape of a child under Washington state law, specifically under the revised Code of Washington 9A.44.076. Under that statute, sexual intercourse between an adult and a child who is at least 12 but less than 14 years of age constitutes the offense, and proof of force or coercion is not required. The age differential and the defined age of the child are sufficient elements for the charge to be established. In March of 1997, while the legal proceedings were in their opening stages, Mary Kay Letourneau gave birth to a daughter. The child was Vili Fualaau's. The baby was named Audrey. She was placed in the care of Suna Fualaau. Steve Letourneau filed for divorce. The legal proceedings moved toward a resolution. Mary Kay Letourneau's legal team negotiated with prosecutors. A plea agreement was reached. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree rape of a child. The sentencing took place in November of 1997 before Judge Linda Lau in King County Superior Court. The potential sentence attached to the charges was substantial, approaching 8 years of incarceration. Judge Lau agreed, under the terms of the plea arrangement, to suspend all but 6 months of that sentence. 3 of those 6 months were further suspended, conditioned on Mary Kay Letourneau's completion of a sex offender treatment program and her strict compliance with a no-contact order prohibiting any communication or interaction with Vili Fualaau. She served approximately 3 months in custody. She was released in January of 1998. 1 month later, in February of 1998, law enforcement officers encountered her in a parked vehicle with Vili Fualaau. That sequence of events is worth pausing on, because it is central to understanding how this case proceeded and how the legal system responded to the conduct involved. She had entered a guilty plea. She had been given a sentence that the legal community, at the time and since, recognized as representing a significant degree of leniency relative to the severity of the charges. She had been given specific, unambiguous conditions: complete the treatment program, maintain no contact with the child who was the identified victim in the criminal proceedings. Those conditions were operative. They were not ambiguous. They were the legal framework within which her release existed. She violated that framework within 1 month of her release. When law enforcement encountered her in the vehicle with Vili Fualaau in February of 1998, she was found to be approximately 7 months pregnant. A second pregnancy with the same child. Judge Lau revoked the suspended sentence. Mary Kay Letourneau was returned to custody to serve the remainder of the original term. Approximately 7.5 years at the Washington Corrections Center for Women in Gig Harbor, Washington. In May of 1998, she gave birth to a second daughter. The child was named Georgia. Like Audrey, she was placed in the care of Suna Fualaau. The revocation hearing is notable for an additional element of record. Judge Lau, at that proceeding, made statements from the bench that reflected the court's assessment of the situation. The pregnancy, visible evidence of conduct that had occurred during the period when the no-contact condition was legally operative, was before the court. The judge's statements indicated that the original extension of leniency had not been met with the compliance that would have been required to justify it. Mary Kay Letourneau began serving her full term. She would remain incarcerated until August of 2004, a period of approximately 6.5 years. During those years, the case became a subject of national media attention that was, by most analytical measures, extraordinary. Books were published. A television movie was produced. Interviews were given from inside the correctional facility. The coverage was, in significant respects, characterized by a framing that treated the case as a romantic tragedy rather than as a record of criminal conduct against a child. That framing has been examined critically in the years since by researchers, clinicians, advocates, and journalists who have applied more analytically rigorous frameworks to the case. The critique, in summary, is this. The media narrative centered the experience and the perspective of the adult who had been convicted of a crime, rather than the child who had been identified as the victim of that crime. It used language and imagery that romanticized what the legal and clinical records established as harmful conduct. And it contributed to a public understanding of the case that was, in material respects, misaligned with what the evidence, the research, and the legal record actually showed. This documentary takes that critique seriously, and applies it to every element of the case as presented here. At this point in the documentary, it is necessary to address directly the framing in the title, the California teacher who seduced her student then murdered him, and to be precise about what the factual record supports, what it does not support in a strict legal sense, and what the broader conversation around this case has examined. Here are the documented facts. Vili Fualaau died on February 9, 2022. He was 37 years old. The reported cause was a death connected to substance use. Multiple outlets reported at the time of his death that Vili had experienced significant personal difficulties in the years following the dissolution of his marriage to Mary Kay Letourneau and following her death. Mary Kay Letourneau died on July 6, 2020, from stage 4 colorectal cancer. She was 58 years old. She predeceased Vili Fualaau by approximately 1 year and 7 months. There are no criminal charges, no indictments, and no convictions connecting Mary Kay Letourneau to Vili Fualaau's death. The legal record does not contain a homicide proceeding. That is a factual statement, and this documentary states it clearly. What the framing in the title reflects is a conversation that has been conducted in academic literature, in clinical discussion, in survivor advocacy communities, and in responsible journalism, about the nature and the reach of harm. The specific question that framing raises is this: when an adult in a position of authority over a child uses that position to establish a relationship that is criminal, that disrupts the child's normal developmental pathway, that subjects the child to decades of public scrutiny from a young age, that shapes every subsequent relationship and life experience that child has, and when that child dies at 37 years old, having navigated all of those consequences, is the harm that was done to that child limited to the specific acts that were the subject of criminal charges? Or does it extend further? The answer that the research literature offers, carefully, without overstating the causation, is that the consequences of childhood sexual abuse by a trusted authority figure can be lifelong. That substance use disorders are among the documented downstream consequences of that category of harm. That early mortality is among the outcomes that the research identifies as elevated in populations with histories of childhood sexual abuse. That the disruption of normal developmental pathways in childhood has consequences that extend across the entire lifespan of the person affected. This documentary does not make a legal determination. It presents the factual record and the research framework and gives you the basis for your own considered understanding of what the record shows. What is beyond any reasonable dispute is that Vili Fualaau was a child when this relationship began. That what was done to him was a crime. That the consequences of that crime shaped his life. And that he died at 37, which is young by any measure. Mary Kay Letourneau was released from the Washington Corrections Center for Women on August 4, 2004. She had served approximately 6.5 years. Vili Fualaau was 21 years old at the time of her release. The no-contact order that had been a condition of the original plea agreement had expired. The two reconnected. The reconnection was publicly known almost immediately, given the level of national media attention the case had sustained over the preceding years. In May of 2005, Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau were married in a ceremony in Washington state. The wedding received extensive media coverage. Entertainment programs broadcast images of the event. Interview opportunities were pursued. The narrative that significant portions of the media had been constructing throughout the case, a narrative of forbidden love that had ultimately persisted against legal and institutional opposition, appeared, on the surface of the coverage, to have reached its resolution. What that coverage did not consistently examine was the foundation on which this relationship had been built. It had been built during a period when one of the two parties was a 6-year-old child and the other was that child's teacher. It had developed across the years of Vili's childhood and early adolescence in a context defined by a profound imbalance of power, professional authority, and developmental inequality. The adult relationship that existed between two people in 2005 was real. It was also the product of a process that the legal system had twice found to be criminal. The marriage lasted approximately 14 years. In 2019, Vili Fualaau filed for legal separation. The dissolution of the marriage proceeded through the courts. The specific circumstances that led to the end of the relationship were not extensively disclosed in public reporting, but the separation and subsequent divorce were confirmed. During the years of the marriage, Mary Kay Letourneau had spoken publicly about the relationship on multiple occasions. She appeared in television interviews. She participated in print media coverage. She remained a figure who generated significant public interest. She also filed, in 2017, a petition in King County Superior Court seeking removal from the Washington State Sex Offender Registry. The basis for that petition included the argument that her marriage to the identified victim in the case was a relevant circumstance in assessing her ongoing registration status. The petition was denied. The presiding judge ruled that the statutory framework did not support the relief being sought. That ruling represented a continuation of the legal system's consistent position: the conviction was a conviction, the registration requirement existed for reasons of public safety, and the subsequent marriage did not alter the foundational legal determination. Mary Kay Letourneau's teaching license had been permanently revoked following her convictions. She worked in various professional capacities in subsequent years. Any complete account of this case must acknowledge the two daughters born to Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau, because they are human beings whose lives were shaped by these events from before they were born. Audrey was born in March of 1997. Georgia was born in May of 1998. Both came into the world during the period of the criminal proceedings. Audrey before the original sentencing, Georgia during the period immediately following the revocation of the suspended sentence. Both daughters were raised primarily by Suna Fualaau, Vili's mother, during the years of Mary Kay's incarceration. They had contact with their father during that period. Following Mary Kay's release from prison and the subsequent marriage, they had contact with both parents. The family structure that resulted from these circumstances was, by any measure, one of considerable complexity. Audrey and Georgia Fualaau have, as adults, maintained a largely private public profile. They have not sought media attention. They grew up in the shadow of one of the most widely covered cases in the history of American true crime journalism, a story that was about them, in a fundamental sense, from before they could understand what that meant. Following the deaths of both their mother in 2020 and their father in 2022, they were adults navigating a grief that carried dimensions most people are not called upon to face. Their well-being, past and present, is part of the human record of this case, and it is part of what this documentary acknowledges as the full cost of what occurred. Mary Kay's 4 children from her marriage to Steve Letourneau, Steve, Mary Claire, Nicholas, and Jacqueline, grew up during the years of their mother's incarceration. Their experiences received very limited media coverage compared to the attention given to other aspects of the case. They are also part of the human reality of what this case represents. The legal proceedings in this case extend beyond the initial arrest and plea agreement, and because the full procedural record is important to a complete understanding of what the legal system did and did not do in response to the conduct involved, this section of the documentary covers that record in detail. The initial charges filed in February of 1997 were 2 counts of second-degree rape of a child, as established under the revised Code of Washington 9A.44.076. The elements of the offense, as noted earlier in this transcript, require proof of sexual intercourse between an adult and a child aged 12 to 13, without any requirement that force or coercion be proven. The investigation that produced those charges was conducted by the King County Sheriff's Office. Investigators conducted interviews with Vili Fualaau, with Mary Kay Letourneau, and with other individuals who had knowledge relevant to the relationship. Physical evidence was collected and assessed. The evidentiary basis assembled by investigators was sufficient to support the charges as filed. The decision to resolve the case through a plea agreement rather than proceeding to a full jury trial reflected several prosecutorial considerations. Among them was the potential impact on Vili Fualaau of a prolonged public trial process, an impact that the prosecution weighed seriously in assessing the most appropriate path to legal resolution. The 2-count plea to second-degree rape of a child, carrying the charges that corresponded to documented incidents, was the framework agreed upon. The sentencing hearing in November of 1997 involved statements from multiple parties. Suna Fualaau made a statement that was interpreted by some observers as reflecting ambivalence about the imposition of a lengthy prison sentence. Mary Kay Letourneau made statements expressing commitment to the conditions of the proposed sentence and to the sex offender treatment program. Judge Lau's decision to suspend the sentence, with the strict no-contact condition attached, was, from the moment it was announced, a subject of significant legal commentary and public debate. Critics of the sentencing decision identified several concerns at the time. The first was that the leniency did not reflect the seriousness of the offense as defined by the statutory framework. The second was that the conditions attached to the suspended sentence, particularly the no-contact order, were conditions that the history of the relationship made extremely unlikely to be observed voluntarily. The third was that the decision set a precedent, or at least a signal, about how the legal system would handle comparable cases involving female perpetrators and male victims. Those concerns were validated by subsequent events within a period of weeks following the release. The revocation hearing in February of 1998, following the discovery of Mary Kay Letourneau in violation of the no-contact order, involved Judge Lau's assessment of the situation as it then stood. The pregnancy, the second pregnancy with the same child, occurring during the period when the no-contact condition was operative, was before the court as evidence. The judge revoked the suspended sentence and imposed the remaining term. That decision was consistent with the legal framework governing probation and conditional release, and it was the correct application of the consequences that had been specified at the original sentencing. The period of incarceration from 1998 through 2004 was not without its own legal dimensions. Questions about the conditions of confinement, about communication access, and about programming participation were subjects of legal attention at various points during that period. None of those matters altered the fundamental legal status of the conviction or the term being served. The 2017 petition to be removed from the sex offender registry was the final formal legal proceeding directly connected to this case. The petition was filed in King County Superior Court. The legal arguments advanced on behalf of the petitioner included the marriage to the identified victim and the assessment of ongoing risk. The court's denial of the petition rested on a statutory analysis that did not find the circumstances presented to be sufficient grounds for the relief sought. The Washington state sex offender registration requirement remained operative through the remainder of Mary Kay Letourneau's life. The clinical and research literature on childhood sexual abuse is an important component of a complete understanding of this case, and this section of the documentary presents that literature in the context of what the documented record shows. The academic field of developmental psychology and the clinical field of trauma-informed practice have produced extensive research on the consequences of childhood sexual abuse. That research spans decades, involves large study populations, and has been conducted across multiple countries and institutional settings. The findings are consistent across methodologically rigorous studies. Childhood sexual abuse is associated with a range of consequences that can extend across the entire lifespan of the person affected. Among the documented consequences in the research literature are elevated rates of depression and anxiety disorders, elevated rates of post-traumatic stress responses, significant difficulties in the formation and maintenance of healthy adult relationships, elevated rates of substance use disorders, challenges in occupational and social functioning, and, in aggregate population data, elevated mortality risk associated with the downstream consequences of these conditions. The specific subcategory of childhood sexual abuse involving a trusted adult in an authority position, a teacher, a coach, a religious figure, a medical professional, a family member, is associated with particularly complex psychological consequences in the research. The reason, as documented in the literature, is that the betrayal of institutional and personal trust is itself a layer of harm that compounds the direct harm of the conduct. When the person responsible for a child's development, safety, and education is also the person who has violated that child's developmental boundaries, the psychological processing of that experience is significantly more complicated than in cases where the perpetrator is a stranger or a person with no defined protective role. The grooming literature is directly relevant to this case. Grooming refers to the systematic process by which adults who engage in inappropriate relationships with children establish conditions of trust, emotional dependency, and normalized contact that make the initiation and continuation of that relationship possible. Researchers who have reviewed the documented history of the Letourneau case have described the pattern of the relationship. Beginning when Vili was 6, developing through years of attentive, individualizing contact within the school environment, escalating as he moved through grade levels, as consistent with the patterns described in the grooming research literature. The research also documents a phenomenon that is important to the public understanding of cases like this one: the possibility that a child who has been groomed can genuinely experience the relationship as loving. The emotional bonds that form in these circumstances are real emotional experiences for the child. But the research is clear that the formation of those bonds occurs under conditions that are not equal, not freely chosen in any meaningful developmental sense, and not consistent with the healthy emotional development that children are entitled to expect within their protective relationships with adults in authority. The consequence of this psychological reality for survivors in adulthood can include significant confusion about the nature of the relationship they experienced, difficulty identifying the harm that was done, and challenges in constructing a healthy understanding of intimacy and trust. These are not inevitabilities for any individual survivor. People are resilient, and outcomes vary. But they are patterns documented in the research with sufficient consistency and strength to be clinically significant. The specific outcomes documented in Vili Fualaau's life, the substance use, the personal difficulties reported in the years following the dissolution of the marriage, the death at 37, are consistent with the patterns the research literature identifies as elevated risk outcomes for survivors of childhood sexual abuse by trusted authority figures. Consistent with does not mean caused by, in a legal sense. But it is the language the research uses, and this documentary uses it accurately. The Mary Kay Letourneau case is one of the most extensively covered true crime cases of the 1990s, and the coverage it received is itself an important part of the historical record of this case. Not because the coverage is irrelevant to what happened, but because it shaped public understanding of events in ways that have had lasting consequences for how the case is understood, discussed, and compared to other cases. The dominant media narrative that emerged in the immediate aftermath of the 1997 arrest and continued through the sentencing, the violation of the no-contact order, the second arrest, the incarceration, the release, and the subsequent marriage, was a narrative of romantic tragedy. The framing relied on several elements. The physical appearance of the defendant, who was young and conventionally attractive and did not fit the visual profile that media coverage had conditioned the public to associate with the category of sexual predator, the stated feelings of both parties, which were consistently characterized in language of love and connection, and the eventual legal marriage, which was presented as a resolution that retroactively complicated the criminal characterization of what had occurred. The gender dynamics of this narrative were examined critically even during the initial coverage, though that criticism was not proportionately represented in the volume of coverage. The analytical observation, made by researchers, legal professionals, and advocates at the time and repeatedly since, is that an identical factual record with the genders of the parties reversed would have produced categorically different coverage. A 34-year-old male teacher who had initiated a sexual relationship with a 12-year-old female student, had been convicted of rape of a child, had violated a no-contact order, had fathered 2 children with that student, had served a prison sentence, and had subsequently married the student upon her reaching adulthood. That case would not have been characterized as a love story in mainstream media coverage. The asymmetry between the two hypothetical coverage frameworks reflects deeply embedded cultural assumptions about gender, sexuality, and harm that are themselves subjects of serious scholarly analysis.
The wedding coverage in 2005 was the highest profile manifestation of the romantic narrative. Entertainment programs produced segments. Magazine arrangements were made. The coverage framed the marriage as the culmination of a persisting connection that had survived imprisonment. What was not centered in that coverage was what the wedding represented from the perspective of the research literature, an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, who had been in a relationship with his abuser since he was 6 years old, marrying that abuser at 21. A circumstance that clinicians who study these cases characterize as consistent with the long-term psychological effects of grooming and early-onset abuse. In the years following the marriage, and increasingly in the years following both parties' deaths, the public conversation around this case shifted. Survivor advocacy organizations used the case as an educational reference point. Journalists who revisited the case brought analytical frameworks informed by the intervening decades of research. Voices that had been present throughout the case but underrepresented in the coverage became more audible. Following Vili Fualaau's death in 2022, the coverage was, by comparison to the coverage of Mary Kay Letourneau's death 2 years earlier, more consistently anchored in a framework that acknowledged the harm that had been done to him and the relationship between that harm and the trajectory of his life. That shift in coverage is itself a piece of data about how public understanding of childhood sexual abuse has evolved over the 3-decade span of this case's public history. This case has implications that extend beyond the individuals directly involved, and a complete documentary treatment of it must address the systemic and institutional dimensions that the case illuminates. Shorewood Elementary School, as an institution, had supervisory and protective responsibilities toward the children in its care. The relationship between Mary Kay Letourneau and Vili Fualaau had been developing for a period of time, beginning when he was a child in her classroom at age 6, before it came to the attention of law enforcement. During that period, the relationship existed within an institutional environment that had policies, administrators, colleagues, and structures designed to ensure the safety and appropriate treatment of students. The question of what institutional mechanisms did or did not identify concerning patterns during that period is one that has been discussed in the context of school safety policy and in the professional training frameworks that have been developed or strengthened in the decades since. This documentary does not make specific factual claims about what any individual at Shorewood Elementary knew or should have known, because the documentary record on that specific question is not sufficiently detailed in the publicly available reporting. What can be said is that the relationship was not identified and reported through institutional channels before it became visible through other means. Professional development training for educators on appropriate professional boundaries, on recognizing and reporting concerning patterns of adult-student interaction, and on institutional culture that makes reporting safe and expected, these are policy responses that have been advocated and, in many school districts, implemented in the years since cases like this one were documented. Washington State strengthened its professional conduct standards for educators and its mandatory reporting frameworks in the period following this case. The sex offender treatment program that was a condition of Mary Kay Letourneau's original plea agreement is also worth examining as a systemic element. Sex offender treatment programs within the correctional and community supervision context operate on a therapeutic model that requires acknowledgement of the conduct, development of insight into the harm caused, and construction of a plan for behavioral change. The effectiveness of that model in cases where the person in treatment simultaneously maintains a public and private characterization of their conduct as a mutual love relationship is a subject that treatment professionals have examined specifically in relation to this case and in broader program evaluation research. The petition to be removed from the sex offender registry in 2017 represents another systemic data point. The legal framework in Washington State for such petitions involves a judicial assessment of ongoing risk to the community. The denial of that petition, on statutory grounds, reflects the legislature's and the court's judgment that the registration framework serves purposes that the circumstances presented did not override. These systemic dimensions are not peripheral to the story. They are part of why this case matters beyond the individuals involved. Cases like this one are studied in professional training programs, in law school curricula, in social work education, and in school administration professional development precisely because they illuminate both the ways the system can fail to protect children and the ways it can, when functioning appropriately, maintain appropriate legal designations and consequences. Any documentary treatment of this case that fails to center the perspective of the person who was harmed is incomplete. This section of the documentary addresses what the public record contains of Vili Fualaau's own characterization of his experience, a record that is more complex and more significant than the love story narrative that dominated media coverage would suggest. Vili Fualaau gave interviews at various points over the years following the conclusion of the criminal proceedings. Some of those interviews were conducted jointly with Mary Kay Letourneau. Some were more independent. The content of those interviews, taken as a whole, presents a picture that is more nuanced and more honest about difficulty than the romantic framing accommodated. In interviews conducted during the years of the marriage, Vili spoke about the relationship in terms that were consistent with the public narrative, expressions of affection and commitment to the family they had built. Those statements are part of the record. Also part of the record are statements he made in interviews that were more independently conducted and in which the questioner pressed for more candid reflection that described aspects of his experience with more complexity. He spoke, in at least one notable interview, about feeling that he had been deprived of a normal adolescence. He spoke about the challenges of having grown up in the way he did, with the level of public attention that had been directed at him from the time he was a teenager, with the circumstances of his birth and upbringing as matters of national public record, with the experience of being the identified victim in a criminal case that was simultaneously being discussed as a romantic narrative. Those statements deserve to be read carefully, because they represent a form of testimony about the experience of being on the receiving end of what the clinical literature describes as grooming and childhood sexual abuse. Testimony given from the position of a person who grew up inside that experience and who was still, as an adult, working to understand what it had meant. The interviews also, in retrospect, reflect something that the research literature documents: the difficulty that survivors of this type of abuse can have in clearly naming and articulating the harm that was done to them, particularly when the relationship in question has been publicly and persistently characterized as loving and mutual. When the cultural and media framework consistently tells you that what happened to you was a love story, the cognitive and emotional work of arriving at a different understanding of your own experience is significant. Vili Fualaau's life after the dissolution of the marriage in 2019 and after the death of Mary Kay Letourneau in 2020 is not extensively documented in public reporting. What the reporting at the time of his death in 2022 reflected was that the final years of his life involved personal difficulties. He was 37 years old when he died. His daughters were adults. His mother had been a consistent presence in his children's lives throughout the preceding decades. The question embedded in the framing of this documentary, whether what was done to Vili Fualaau constituted a form of harm that extended to his death, is not a question that admits of a simple answer. It is a question that this documentary has approached by presenting the factual record, the legal record, and the research literature with accuracy and without overstatement. Here is the summary of what those three sources of information, taken together, support. The factual record establishes that Vili Fualaau was subjected to a sexual relationship with an adult authority figure beginning in childhood, that this relationship resulted in 2 criminal convictions against that adult, that the relationship shaped his life from its earliest stages in ways that were publicly documented and involuntary, and that he died at 37 in circumstances connected to substance use. The legal record establishes that the conduct was criminal under Washington state law, that the perpetrator was convicted twice, that the conditions of the original plea agreement were violated and the sentence was reinstated, that a subsequent petition to remove the conviction's regulatory consequences was denied, and that the legal system's consistent position was that the conduct was criminal and the consequences were appropriate. The research literature establishes that childhood sexual abuse by trusted authority figures is associated with elevated rates of the specific categories of difficulty, substance use, relationship dysfunction, psychological distress, early mortality, that the public record shows were present in Vili Fualaau's life. That association does not establish individual causation in a legal or clinical sense. It establishes a pattern that is documented with sufficient rigor and consistency to be taken seriously as a framework for understanding what the factual record shows. What those three sources, together, make it impossible to sustain is the narrative that what happened to Vili Fualaau was a love story with collateral legal complications. The record, full, accurate, and honestly examined, is a record of a child who was harmed by an adult in a position of authority and trust, whose life was shaped by that harm, and who died young. I want to step back from the factual record now and talk directly to you, the way I always do at this point in the crime scene, because you have stayed with this documentary all the way through and you deserve a direct and honest conversation about what this case means. This is one of the cases that has stayed with me. Not because it is the most extreme case I have ever documented. Not because the events are the most difficult to report. But because of the public conversation around it, because of the particular way this case has been misunderstood for decades. It is a significant one. It deserves to be told accurately. If this documentary gave you a new perspective on this case, if it shifted the way you understand what happened and what it means, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. This is exactly the kind of case where the conversation matters, and I read every comment you leave. If you are watching the crime scene for the first time, welcome to the channel. This is what we do here. We take cases that deserve serious, accurate, and respectful attention, and we give them exactly that. No sensationalism. No misrepresentation. No shortcuts. Just the full documented story, reported the way it deserves to be reported. Hit the subscribe button so you are here for the next documentary. If this is a case you think more people should understand accurately, share this video. The conversation around cases like this one matters, and the way it starts is with people deciding to have it honestly. Hit the like button if this documentary gave you something to think about. And I will see you in the next one.